Okay, hi, thank you for coming. To introduce myself very briefly, I'm Susanna Davies-Crook. I'm an artist, writer, curator, and head of growth at Ignota, and I'm also a hypnotherapist and a yoga teacher. The provocation of co-programming performances with Nottingham Contemporary to be held within the City of Caves beneath Nottingham was instantly really enticing to us at Ignota. We make work at the intersection of spirituality, technology, and consciousness, and have published books on altered states, spells, and of course, Pauline Oliveros' quantum listening. We make an annual diary that is a tool for the practice of everyday life and includes rituals, recipes, and tarot spreads, and a digital full moon journal and audio platform that folds in contributions from astrologers, philosophers, artists, poets, technologists, musicians, and importantly, practitioners. We each also have our own spiritual practice, which is at the center of things. Thinking about Pauline Oliveros' deep listening and quantum listening in the context of caves, dwelling, vibration, and therefore resonance and listening is a true privilege. We at Ignota would like to thank Nottingham Contemporary and Janan for this extraordinary invitation, and to Philippa and the wonderful technical team here for making it happen. It's been amazing. The Oliveros work included in this Hollow Earth exhibition includes excerpts from Deep Listening, an album recorded in 1988 by Oliveros and what was to become Deep Listening Band. To make this album, they descended into the 2 million US gallon Fort Worden cistern in Washington, D.C., a damp, subterranean, cave-like environment so vast that there was a 45-second reverberation time. This parallel of descent is where we find ourselves today, to go down, to deepen, to go deeper, and to slow down, to change. The mind-expanding presentations over the last 2 days have explicated on time, deep time, cave as mind, mind as cave, and spiritual practice. The cave as a site of inner journeying, a place where monks go in order to expand out, is of interest. One can talk about meditation, but one cannot know meditation unless one meditates. One cannot know quantum listening unless one practices listening. The cave formations I have visited in my own spiritual practice and meditated within, the Canary Caves of Mumbai, or the cave structures of Hampi in India, or King Arthur's Cave in Tintagel, Cornwall, or the cave network of pyramids surrounding Mexico City, are places where the grooves of consciousness are so strong that meditation comes immediately. It is a descent. The mind drops in instantly. Meditation and hypnosis are also of deep time. There are anecdotal stories of monks who die in meditation but do not immediately decay. They are preserved in the mind cave and through the mind-body connection. The history of altered states in the cave, as we heard from Laura Emsley earlier, and through the David Lewis Williams book, The Mind in the Cave, is a fertile ground to consider. And what strikes me about the cave is that it's an embodied knowledge. One must experience it or feel it. And the universe listens to us as we listen to it. And I think this cave that we spent hours listening in yesterday was listening back. The sandstone vibrates with our bodies in shared resonance. We use the whole body as a sense organ for listening and transformation. And last night we descended and then vibrated full body with Maxwell Sterling and his piece responding to quantum listening, and the cave at 111 hertz, centered around this divine frequency which occurs within prehistoric underground temples, such as the Hypergeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, followed by Evan Efekoya's chest cavity as resonance chamber, in which the looped resonance of their voice was made manifest and joined by the almost heart-like metronome of the drum as channeled by Evan. Tonight, we vibrate further as we descend a second time. Cellist and composer Lucy Railton will provide a guided performance, honoring listening as a precious tool to sense, absorb, and empathize with our surroundings and with each other. And artist and musician Paul Purgus will assemble a new sound performance constructed entirely with materials from the archive of South Asian field recording pioneer Deban Bhattacharya. And now I'm going to pass over to Sarah, who's going to say a bit more about quantum listening.
Thank you, Susanna. Just checking if my mic on. Can people hear me? Thank you so much. I'm going to remain seated, but please be assured I'm also vibrating enthusiastically with gratitude and other things to Chanan and everyone at Nottingham Contemporary for inviting us. It's really an honor to close the Talks program curated by Chanan, what I think of in my mind as the above ground program. So I'm going to try and draw a few threads together in relation to Pauline Oliveros' Sonic Meditations and Ignota's publication of Quantum Listening, which Oliveros describes as a theory derived from the practice of deep listening. So in Laurie Anderson's foreword to our edition, she quotes Oliveros' line, that in the 20th century, we will be grappling with who we are as extended human beings. I believe that actually, she said, in the 21st century, we'll be grappling with who we are as extended human beings. And I've written it down wrong. Yes, that's correct. So that we're in the 21st century now. So I think that this weekend across both talks and performances, it's been so rich with this sort of grappling, traveling both vertically through the caves and alternate states of consciousness and horizontally across social relations and geology, and seeking to undo the horizontal and vertical separation altogether to unravel binaries and dualisms between, for example, surface and underground, inside and outside. Yesterday, I loved how Catherine Newsoft put it, referencing Fanon. She said that in his work, he talks about exploding the dialectic with the cosmic yes, so that we can think about space and experience as both container and relation. Psychic, social, and geographic topography is not of one origin and destination, but of many beginnings and many ends. I think that this multi-level existence is what quantum thinking points towards. In the so-called normal world, everything appears to be either a wave or a particle. But we know that a facet of quantum weirdness is that if we refine perception, everything is always both. Everything is and isn't at the same time, as according to Hermeticism. And so to some degree, reality is created by the observer. Quantum listening describes a technology of consciousness, I think, to refine the instruments of perception, that is ourselves, to be able to heal, which means, I think, in part, to be able to hold things in relation, even as they're incommensurate, fractured, or slipping away. So soon, I'm going to be really delighted to welcome Zeynep to take us more deeply into quantum listening and Pauline Oliveros' practice of practice with a presentation. And this presentation is going to be interleaved with practices of deep listening and sonic meditation, the first of which will be led by Susanna.
So I'm going to ask you to just all put your feet flat on the floor. So arrange yourself if that's comfortable for you or however feels right, but if you can be grounded in some way. And then we're just going to take 3 deep breaths all together. So taking a deep breath all the way in, all the way out. And taking a deep inhale. Deep exhale. And final deep breath to expand. Exhale to release. And so, just sitting comfortably, I'd like you to open your eyes widely. And then let your eyelids close extremely slowly. And become aware of how your eyelids are closing. When your eyelids are closed, turn your eyes slowly from left to right, around, up, and down. Let your eyes rest comfortably in their sockets. Try to be aware of the muscles behind the eyes. And of the distance from these muscles to the back of the head. Cover your eyes with your palms. and shut out all the light. Become aware of all the sounds in the environment. When you think you have established contact with all of the sounds in the external environment, very gradually introduce your fingers into your ears or cover them with your palms. Try to shut out all external sound. Listen carefully to the internal sounds of your own body working. After a long time, gradually open your ears and include the sounds of the external environment. Thank you. That was Sonic Meditation number 19, excerpted from Sonic Meditations by Pauline Oliveros. And now I'd like to hand over to Zeynep for her presentation.
Can you hear me well? Can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. Okay. Good evening. How are you all feeling today? Good? Excellent. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. and to Nottingham Contemporary, to Janan, Philippa, and all the technical team for their wonderful help and for organizing this event, and to Ignota Books, to Susanna and Sarah for inviting me and hosting me as part of this exciting session. I'm really delighted to be here. And I have been participating in the talks and the workshops with great enthusiasm. So I'm really delighted and honored to be a part of this brilliant event. So today I will talk about Pauline Oliveros and deep listening with some context. My contribution is titled Listening to Depth, Surface, and Margins. So I will propose sound as a creative and critical medium for thinking about actually this title, Listening to Depth, Surface, and Margins. I will explore the components of this title, considering deep listening practice, but also philosophy developed by composer Pauline Oliveros. Some of you might have already participated in the wonderful workshop on sonic meditations yesterday, convened by Francis Morgan, and heard about Pauline Oliveros. But for those of you who might not be familiar with Pauline Oliveros as a composer and as a thinker, I would like to introduce Oliveros once more. So Pauline Oliveros was a pioneering composer in experimental and electronic music who offered expanded ways of working with and thinking through sound. Historically, we can consider Oliveros's aesthetic explorations in relation to experimental music practices, sound and media art, indigenous musical cultures, as well as in relation to yoga and martial arts. Oliveros's aesthetic trajectory as a composer initially follows the ethos of the 1960s interdisciplinary art networks and social contexts and civil rights movements. It would not be possible to do justice to this topic in a short presentation like this, but it would be fair to note a few highlights. For instance, the emphasis on everyday life, on using everyday sounds, actions, movements, matters, situations, and music, sound, and art making. The search for anti-institutional art and democratization of art. Definitions of music, music performance, and music score have been further questioned along these lines. And verbal text scores and event scores, especially as associated with George Brett and various other composers and artists involved in Fluxus art network, have come into being more loudly. One other important aspect to note in relation to Oliveros will be women composers' resistance and challenge against a particular male avant-garde, which was invested in conventional trajectories of invention, control, and progression. In her book, Pink Noises, electronic musician, composer, and author Tara Rogers, for instance, refers to Oliveros' voice and work, questioning the notions of invention, or in Rogers' words, what counts in quotation marks as invention. Deep listening, as a creative practice and everyday philosophy, has departed from this aesthetic context and has been developed in collaboration with various contributors, in particular with artist and healer Ione, Oliveros' lifetime and creative partner, and dancer, educator, and movement artist Heloise Gold. The community includes many musicians, artists, improvisers, dancers, healers, thinkers. If you're interested in, there is a Center for Deep Listening housed at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York, led by artist Stephanie Loveless. So you can have a look at the website if you're interested in. And this image is from actually a recent text that Stephanie wrote honoring the life and legacy of Pauline Oliveros, followed by the links to the Deep Listening Center. So the practice includes breathing, sound, voice, and movement exercises, as well as journaling dreams and reflections on these exercises. As Oliveros explains in her book, Deep Listening, A Composer's Practice, deep refers to complex. And complex listening invites us, in Oliveros' words, to explore unhabituated ways of listening. So this is the phrasing that she actually uses, because when we say deep, we usually have a sense of whether there is a deep ingredient, right, embedded in a situation. But actually, deep refers to complex, and the word she uses is unhabituated ways of listening. That is, complex listening does not take methods, acts, and processes of listening for granted or fixed. Similarly, listening to depth or complexity implies probing and coming across unexpected, unpredictable ways of relating bodies, matters, sounds, and times and spaces. So this is a very process-oriented practice. Possibilities of combining sounds or bodies of sounds are many. In fact, in her collected writings, Sounding the Margins, Oliveros tells us about how she has come to listening as a practice at an early age. As she says, she has noticed a new sonic occurrence or a new sound that she has not noticed before each time she listens to everyday sounds. Of course, listening is not neutral. It is a temporal, spatial, situated, disciplined, and disciplining act driven by both cognitive and cultural programming and by social and political organization of sounds and senses. Consider tools and technologies of listening, including the human body to begin with, musical instruments, headphones, speakers, various sound recording technologies, as well as smartphones and digital assistants that humans interact with on a daily basis. In different degrees and capacities, these technologies can all be understood as both trained and training mediums for how to listen, what to listen, and what not to listen. The trajectory encourages thinking about distributed and algorithmic forms of knowledge making, but also methodological approaches to listening itself. Historian Karin Bijsterveld and the sonic skills research team led by Bijsterveld have suggested the notion of sonic skills while examining how environmental scientists, medical scientists, and engineers have used and developed particular ways of listening and searched for and identified particular sounds for experiments, diagnosis, and ultimately for scientific knowledge production. Deep listening becomes a more intriguing philosophy and practice when considered in line with such approaches to listening, which are also integral to everyday life. With a series of specified meditations, deep listening, one may argue, suggests a methodical procedure as well. The suggestion is, however, not to produce or establish a scientific tool or knowledge. On the contrary, the suggestion is to question the categorical, the habituated, what becomes given or fixed. In effect, deep listening and sonic meditations are exploratory and improvisational. The unknown, the unexpected, unprescribed are welcome and facilitated, and so are multiple ways of knowing and unknowing, multiple ways of configuring and reconfiguring an environment, repositioning the sensible with the insensible, the recognized with the ignored or left out, and exploring human and non-human interactions while situating humans and non-humans similarly. In that respect, deep listening joins and responds to feminist theories of embodiment, new materialisms, and process philosophies. I now wish to introduce and highlight specific features of meditations that help us better understand these larger ideas. Let me begin with ways of listening. So there are two ways of listening proposed in this practice: focal and global listening. And focal listening refers to focused listening. For instance, picking up an individual sound and focusing on that sound for a while. Global listening refers to listening to surrounding sounds without attending to an individual sound. When you practice focal and global listening, you realize that these descriptions are only theoretical propositions. In effect, focused and global listening are interwoven. As you focus on a sound for a long while, and I believe we had a brief exercise of that with the first meditation, and yesterday we had a nice conversation about that in Francis's session, and with the sonic meditations that I will propose, I'm sure you will be reminded of that. once you focus on a sound for a long while, you start hearing the temporal and spatial extensions and tonal gradations of a sound, which mingle with other sounds in wherever you are, be it a physical or an imagined space. Sound is a plural, mobile, and fluid phenomenon. In addition to expanded time and space continuum and extended movement of sound, we see the implications of some of the other ideas that I mentioned earlier, such as environmental voices, multiple temporalities, embodied listening, and distributed listening. Among these concepts, let me briefly reiterate that multiple temporalities attending to different time and space dimensions are already implicated in the practice of focal and global listening. Here I wish to elaborate on environmental voices in line with human and non-human interactions and in line with embodied listening and distributed listening. Deep listening and sonic meditations suggest and facilitates the ways in which one can sound, voice, speak, and sing with non-human bodies and forces, including both nature and inanimate bodies, and also technology, everyday digital technologies, as well as with hybrid and technologized bodies. In this slide, you see an example, the river meditation, which encourages projecting one's voice with the tones in the rushing waters. Let me set a series of questions here with respect to this meditation. How might your voice merge with the tones of the rushing waters? Would that be a speech or a song mode for you? Would the rushing waters respond to you? How would you know? What acoustic differences and similarities that one might notice in this practice? How might you locate your body in this practice? Not simply your ears or throat or vocal cords, but your sensing body. What might be the implications of this practice for you and for others, after all? With these questions, I wish to note two things. First, these meditations, I think, make us think about indigenous cultural and musical practices. In indigenous cultures, broadly speaking here, there is an engagement with environment and environmental sounds as a daily practice, as part of ritual, culture, and community making and healing. Take, for instance, anthropologist and music scholar Stephen Felt's pioneering book, Sound and Sentiment, which explores singing of Kaluli people of Bosavi along these lines. With this research, Felt provides us with some critical ideas and methods, such as voicing in the act of listening, and vice versa, listening in the act of voicing. In a sonic meditation, like the river meditation, we do not have a particular collective ritual, but in effect, we have an activity which can be practiced individually or with a group of people, which leads to making a shift in perspective, a shift in understanding voice and body, not as fixed, but in the making, while listening. The shift is also about terms and ways of interaction, communication, and sense-making, a reconfiguration of bodies and space that we participate in together. In these practices, terms of sending a sound, receiving a sound, or responding to a sound or to one another are not dyadic, but complex and distributed. One can also remain silent, respond to the exercise internally, mentally, or below the normative thresholds of hearing, above or below the normative thresholds of hearing. And here's my second note, embodied and distributed listening. Maybe I go back to this slide. Deep listening meditations offer us expanded conceptions of sound, that is, sound not as limited to audition or normatively defined auditory thresholds, but as felt vibrations, as cross-sensory and multisensory acts and manifestations. Vibration is central to this practice. As Oliveros writes, the skin listens too, and the skin speaks too, I would add, right? I forgot to introduce myself. you have my bio in the program, but maybe this is a good moment to say what I do and how I've come to deep listening practice. I'm a lecturer in music and sonic arts at Queen's University, Belfast. I work in the Department of Music and Sonic Arts Research Centre, and I am a scholar of voice and sound, drawing on experimental music, sound and media art, science and technology studies, environmental and medical humanities. And I have a forthcoming book with Goldsmiths Press titled Building a Voice, Sound, Surface, Skin. And my book looks at the emergence, embodiment and mediation of skin, drawing on individual and collective processes of voice making that we see in experimental music and sound and media art. And I talk about Pauline Oliveros' work in my book as well. And with these scholarly interests, I've also got interested in the practice itself, and I joined the training, and I have become a certified practitioner. And I learned more nuanced and detailed aspects of this practice through this training. So I find this approach really, really useful and fruitful for my work on voice and skin, about how a voice emerges, gets embodied and mediated as skin, as a multisensory surface, not simply as an envelope, but as an interface that both connects and differentiates as it interacts with various bodies, senses, and technologies. And this approach is inspired by embodied and distributed listening. And in this context, distributed listening is not always voluntary or conscious. We are also affected by what we consider as background sounds, which we do not consciously or voluntarily attend to. And I think there is space in Pauline Oliveros' practice for that kind of approach as well. And here I'm also drawing on music and media scholar Anaïd Kasabian's notion of ubiquitous listening with the sense of distributed listening. So the awareness of both voluntary and involuntary participation, I consider this as another opportunity to tap into an expanded, simultaneous, and multiple time and space dimensions, which Pauline Oliveros considers in the form of quantum listening and quantum improvisation. So quantum listening and improvisation, as noted in the selected passages that you see in the slide, from Pauline Oliveros and from the book published by Ignota Books, 2022, right? It's a very recent publication. So I chose some passages from that book and from the essay. Quantum listening, in quotation marks, is listening to more than one reality simultaneously, listening for the least perceptible differences, perception at the edge of the new, almost like accessing the imperceptible or recognizing the imperceptible, or asking this question whether this is possible. And the second passage, as you see, quantum listening is listening in as many as possible ways simultaneously while changing and being changed through the listening. So in a way, whatever we're listening to, we ask questions about agency in a collaborative way. And quantum listening leads back to practice and practice, which means it remains as a question, not as a fixed proposition or a state. So these passages, I believe, suggest questions about agency, capacity for errancy, and acceptance of uncertainty. And in this discussion, in this essay, and in the book, Oliveros particularly refers to human and machine interaction and inquires into how hybrid and technologized bodies may have consciousness as well. Take everyday digital devices as an example, for instance, a computer. I mean, this has been an ongoing discussion since the developments of the 19th century technologies, right? And we have lots of media scholars actually asking similar questions like Oliveros asks. But if you were to focus on a very simple example like computers, computers have databases. Whether or not we want to call this database a memory similar to a human memory is another question. But like humans, computers make mistakes and random selections. They may also capture and resolve errors in a way that humans may not be able to. The point is that we tend to humanize technologies using the terms of human cognition and language, whereas human and non-human interactions change both humans and non-humans in various ways. These interactions, therefore, make us sit with the questions of agency, control, and errancy, and consider these terms not specific to one single body or kind, but as shared and distributed to many. This point brings to my concluding remarks about deep listening. My practice of deep listening has encouraged me to constantly ask a series of questions: how to be and listen with another, how to hear and understand another, how to share. I do not have a single answer to any of these questions. I believe I will keep asking these questions and consider them as part of both individual and collective imagination. To my experience, this is the critical and creative promise of deep listening. Relating to these questions, I wish to conclude with a remark by Pauline Oliveros. Quote, "I recognize that being heard is a step toward being understood. Being understood is a step toward being healed. Understanding is a step toward building community." End quote. Thank you. Now, with that in mind, I want to introduce the first sonic meditation. May I please invite you, if you're comfortable about where you are, you can stay seated. But if you wish, please, would you mind, I would invite you to stand up, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Maybe I'll also step back. Okay, so I would also encourage us, I would like to invite you to again focus on your breathing, but this time maybe we can count, right? Maybe we can take a deep breath and count to 5 in your own time, and then exhale and count to 5 as you're exhaling, okay? So shall we do that? Start in your own time. One more time, please. And third time and last time. Okay, now if you don't mind shaking, just to, wake up. Okay, good. In the exercises, we actually focus on some Tai Chi exercises as part of this training. And one exercise is quite striking, which is the source of vitality associated with kidneys. So can I just invite you, and again, if you don't feel like it, you don't have to do it by all means. But if you don't mind just swinging your arms like this, okay? And in your own time and rhythm, and you can bend your knees as well as you're doing it, as you wish, okay? And when you do that, start slapping your kidneys, okay? Slap your kidneys. That's your vitality source, I've been told. Okay. And try to follow your own rhythm doing that. Let's take 2 minutes with that. And then we can finish it. And if you feel like it, you can accelerate your own rhythm, get faster, and bend your knees, and just flow. But please slap your kidneys. That's essential to wake up. Okay, so maybe we start slowing down, okay? And you come back to your position. And if you wish, you can stay where you are or go back to your seated position. So the sonic meditation that I would like to introduce, I have two sonic meditations to explore and share with you today. The first one is one word. This is a simple suggestion. So choose a word, just any word. A word that means something to you, okay? Or not. Choose a word. Listen to it first mentally. When you feel ready, slowly and gradually, begin to voice this word by allowing each tiny part of it to sound extremely prolonged. So you can have variation options. For instance, you can increase the speed of each repetition as imperceptibly as possible. Or you can basically reverse the process by slowing down, again, as imperceptibly as possible until the original utterance returns. Okay, thank you. Also keeping an eye on the clock. So thank you so much for joining and for engaging with the second sonic meditation. We have one more, but that will be a closing, greeting or a closing sonic meditation. Now I think we move on to Q&A. Maybe I keep the slide in the background. Okay. Thank you.
So much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Mhm.
So that was so wonderful. I think so my phone. Hello? Okay, that's
Yes,
great.
it
Thank you
works.
so much.
Thank you.
So, among many things, thank you for reminding me that I also forgot to introduce myself. My name is Sarah, and in the many limbs of my being and doing, one of them is the co-founder of Ignota. And as an editor and writer, I'm really happy to dwell in the words in the one-word meditation. So obviously, perhaps like other people in the room, I chose the word caves. And that forms the basis of the first iteration of my question. But I would like to say that this is meant to be a collective Q&A. So please line up your questions to put to Zeynep and to Susanna. And I will, if you put your hand up, then as in other talks, we'll take the mic around and take your questions for the speakers. So something about Oliveros is that she is a really wonderful writer. She's both precise and very receptive at the same time. In many ways, she reminds me of the Taoist principle of doing by not doing. And I recall that actually when Ursula Le Guin met her, so the first book in our Terra Ignota series was by Ursula K. Le Guin, and she talks about the time that she met Pauline Oliveros, and she describes Oliveros as being a beautiful woman like a grey rock in a riverbed. And she says that Oliveros told her and the group of women that they were with, who were all very academic and cerebral, that they should offer their experience as their truth, which I really liked. And the precision with which she picks the word unhabituated to talk about depth and deepness made me think that there's a little bridge to dwelling, which is another bridge between the materiality of caves and the pseudo-immateriality of vibration. So I was wondering if, to kick us off, before we take everyone else's questions, if you could speak a bit more about dwelling in your practice and as practice.
Dwelling, that's a, I guess I consider dwelling as practice. It's not like it's in my thinking, for instance, when it comes to the theorization of voice skin, I don't consider, for instance, skin simply as a container or as an envelope, but I consider dwelling as almost like an extended, surface, almost like as a practice, as a process. So dwelling as a verb, really, a series of activities, a series of interactions with one's environment. So in dwelling in the context of deep listening, that's why I think it's important to recognize deep is not about essentializing sound or thinking about it as a closed entity, but actually thinking about it as as a medium, as a channel. So as a series of activities, as a series of manifestations. So it goes back to the title of the essay, A Theory to Practice and Practice and Practice. As for the mobility of sounds, I think dwelling will be another, I think to think about dwelling in relation to mobility will be another interesting angle here. Because you don't dwell in one single space, or you don't dwell in one single time, or for that matter, you don't dwell in one single body or voice, and we all carry multiple voices. Our skin is not simply a protective envelope, but it's also an active interface. So in that sense, thinking about dwelling, ironically, makes me think about not settling into a place or settling into a moment, but settling, presence is another angle that we could talk about, but it's mobility. It's like how you go from one thing to another and then how you come back, and that kind of cyclical movement. But as I'm talking, I use the word moment. I think that holds significance too. So you dwell in the present time, even though we're talking about this interactions between the past and the future. And there is a sense of futurity, especially in Pauline's work as well, in quantum listening and quantum improvisation, and her fascination with this hybrid technologized bodies and the possibilities of hearing or accessing the imperceptible. So dwelling in a moment then would be being present, right? Being present in that moment. But again, that brings that kind of nice interplay between focused and global. And how, as you focus on a path, or as you try to stay in that sound, you're actually opening up to yourself, to other sounds. And in a way, life happens in different, through different angles.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Do we have any questions from the audience? Ella.
Over questioning, but this day has been so rich, and I think because I missed yesterday, I'm like trying to make up for lost time. But also, thank you so much to you all. When I heard Pauline Oliveros speak years ago now at the Her Noise Symposium, she's told this amazing story about a kind of early, what would you call it? Kind of wonder, I guess, at taking apart tape machines, and I was thinking through your this brilliant articulation of deep listening about attention. And this kind of very focused, very dedicated, devoted almost attention to the parts, the material parts of the tape machine in her work. And I wondered, it's a very kind of wide question, but about the relationship of deep listening, quantum listening to attention that perhaps might be to the sonic, but also to, again, perhaps to the infra or the ultrasonic, or even outside the sonic and to other senses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think attention is definitely a keyword in the practice, but also involuntary and improvisational aspects are very much at play as well. So the way attention, I think, is very much linked to awareness, or trying to be aware of the situation, but it's not necessarily devised as or as associated with intention. For instance, there is a sense of directionality. Let's say you choose an individual sound and you try to stay with it, and there's this idea about like the meditation, for instance, that we began with. I mean, we closed our eyes because it's so much stimuli, right? We just wanted to be able to focus on the feeling of sound, or the vibrations, or the feel of the atmosphere, if you will, right? So we're trying to attend to something, right? So there is a sense of directionality, but we're also welcoming some sort of unintended consequences as well. So attention not as a really framed category, but as a tool actually to explore the unexpected. So that's how I see the role of attention in Pauline Oliveros' work. It's more linked to awareness, and a kind of a situated awareness as well, right? To a resource to perhaps notice the unnoticed. But eventually it goes towards unintended discoveries. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Do we have anyone else? No? In that case, great, I get to ask a question, which is, I loved the emphasis that you highlighted in Oliveros' practice of unknowing, imperceptibility. Ignota actually comes from lingua ignota, which is Hildegard of Bingen's unknown language. Mm-hmm. And the epistemic humility, I think, that is indicated by such an inclination is really valuable. Would you say that it's particularly necessary or a useful practice in our particular epochal moment, when it seems like it's quite clear that more collective healing is necessary than ever?
I would absolutely say so, yes. It's a great question and comment, because I think these activities definitely helps us or helps strengthening our immunities for uncertainties, because the more you practice process-based activities, the more you gain the strength for generating perhaps alternative ways of looking at things, for the possibility. I mean, you generate a way to hear another in a different way, but also you really preparing yourself, you're equipping yourself with a sense of uncertainty, right? And that we need that, because we're especially considering our global challenges. I guess Laura mentioned this in earlier in her talk this morning. Looking into the darkness, we need to face the reality, and we need to accept the limitation to knowing. I think that's the wording that she used, and most definitely I would reiterate and echo that. I mean, these practices, when they're process-oriented, in a strange way, gathering our focus and then opening us again, right, definitely prepares us for making concrete shifts and strengthening our immunity for dealing with the unknown, accepting the unknown, because unknown is the reality at the end of it, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're really equipped with some ideas and practices, exercises to question control, also to tap into a shared agency. Yeah.
I love the language of immunity so much, because it's very much about tolerance of the unknowable other. In the case of COVID, it was a virus, which was a non-human other. And this inherent relationality, I think, that listening is a portal to. I wondered if you could speak a bit more about listening and co-creation. I'm kind of thinking of the Escher image, where the two hands are kind of holding each other, and like one creates the other, and the fact that we're on the stage and we're looking at these people here. If you could maybe speak about the formations of collectivity in that regard.
Well, that's another great question, because we are listening to the things that we're not aware of, probably, now in the space, and perhaps, we're also listened to without knowing that. So there is, there are interesting and complex ways of creating solidarities. And the last meditation that I will offer is titled Energy Changes. So it's really a sharing, a time and space dimension, and responding to the realities that we experience or that we may create together, in different dimensions. So listening, because it's a practice, listening is a question. I mean, we come across listening in a variety of contexts, and I don't consider listening as a method for resolution. I don't consider listening as a quick recipe, for fixing our problems. Listening is a practice, and that practice itself, I think, creates interesting solidarities, and creates interesting also points of contact and differentiation.
Yes, I think that listening is the space of a question. It's an invitation to you, the audience, for one final question before we move on to the final sonic meditation led by Zeynep. And then after that, ticket holders will be invited to the cafe to walk with us to descend one final time to vibrate collectively in the caves. Do we have a final question? I have a question. No? Okay. Great, thank you.
Oh no, I have a question.
Oh, you have a question. Great.
I have wanted to ask Zeynep this the whole time. I was saving it until now. I just wanted to know a little bit more about the deep listening training. So as someone who engages with quantum listening and with deep listening and kind of, muddles through it in my own practice, in my own muddly way, I would be so interested to just kind of hear from you maybe how it differentiates, or a couple of key things that you really took away that felt like that space helped you to hold and to facilitate.
So if you're interested, the training includes two courses, like two intensive courses. And I really appreciated learning about the nuances of this practice and sharing it with the community. Because communal aspect is very important. Part of the training is devising workshops for different groups of people. And because these meditations are open to interpretation, even though they come with specified directions, the result is, unknown and unpredictable, and there's that openness about the meditations as well. So it's open to interpretation. And I think the learning process begins with being part of that community, learning about the nuances and seeing different interpretations and exploring this practice with different groups of people. And the training facilitates that and gives a frame, to that activity. Also provides the possibility of offering this to different groups of people. So I got interested in, because also I have been interested in narratives of healing, and there is this aspect in this practice, how we understand the role of sound and music and narratives of healing, and that is also going to community making and healing. Also thinking about sound in different ways through different approaches. So I found lots of possibilities of exploring these questions by joining the community and following the training. And the phrasing that we use, we become deep listening facilitators or practitioners, right? So whoever is taking this training, it's just you become a facilitator or a practitioner, because it's really a learning process. It's a process. But I recommend it if you're interested. I recommend the training and visiting the website if you're interested in learning more about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall I move on to? Oh, thank you. You're very kind. This is the last session, so you've been very patient with us. Thank you. Okay. So the very last meditation is the energy changes. Let's see whether the energy will change for you. Okay. So here is the description. Listen to the environment as a drone. In your own, in your own time and in your own, wherever you are, and establish contact mentally with all of the continuous external sounds, and include of your own continuous internal sounds, such as blood pressure, heartbeat, and nervous system. When you feel prepared, or when you are triggered by a random of intermittent sound from the external or internal environment, make any sound you like in one breath, or a cycle of like sounds. When a sound or a cycle of sounds is completed, re-establish mental connection with the drone which you first established before making another sound or cycle of like sounds. Okay? So, shall we try that? Would you be willing to try that? Okay. So let's try to listen to the sounds of this environment as a drone. Let's also focus on blood pressure, our own blood pressure, heartbeat, and nervous system, and pay attention to the internal sounds. Thank you. Thank you so much.